January 1945. A white lane outside Foy, Belgium, breath-cracking in the cold. They come quick out of the spruces, grey shapes worked low behind the snow berm, one man humping the canvas drum of an MG and another dragging the tripod by the legs. The rest float in and out of trunks MP40s, tucked like knives, heads down 20-yard bounds meant to be the last before the street. First shape lifts to place the gun. The American line never moves. 7 rifles lift sights already set on the dark seam where the spruce line ends and the open field begins. Triggers break. The sound does not roll like a single volley. It chatters in a metronome that never needs to pause for a bolt. One man takes the gunner through the collarbone. Another folds the assistant who reaches for the feed. A third shot walks into the drum as it tips, spilling cartridges into the snow like seed. The MG never speaks. For 2 seconds there is only the high tin click of clips running dry and the flat punch of 30-06 finding wood and wool and bone. A German steps up to throw the tripod and shudders back, kneecaps buckling. Someone in the trees snaps a carabiner and works the bolt by reflex. The rhythm is wrong now, always just behind the American tempo. Duschensessislich, the sudden quiet that is not quite silence, leaves only steam and the thin hiss of wind, and one man's hard mouth breathing under a wool scarf. Cases smoke. A clip pops free into a mitten, and another thumb drives down 8 more, the rifle returning to the cheek without a thought. Far left, a German NCO tries to force a second push, throwing his men toward a low stone wall. 3 rifles track him fire, and the push collapses into the wall and stays there, hugging it, not rising again. Then a second lane, another village edge, 2 fields over, starts to move. They try a different script, no MG yet, just 4 MP40s, sprinting the shallow dip to break the corner. The first man clears the dip and pitches as if tripped by wire. Then the second one tumbles on his side, trying to shoulder the weapon while falling. The fire that catches them is even unsubtle, almost bored. And then, nothing. No music. No words. Just the hum in the ears, and the snow taking back the sound. By early 1945, Germany is out of fuel, out of pilots, out of time, but not out of habits. One German machine gun can lock a lane. One close-in rush can break a corner. One squad, practiced in the ritual of tripod belt and short, sharp advance, can still make Americans duck their heads and give ground. That is the promise the men in grey carry into the trees, that contact 1 at 50 meters erases the arithmetic of American artillery and the weight of an army behind a ridge. Across the line, American platoons are tired in the tendon and the mind. They have shoveled roads through Hürtgen, where the forest eats sound and makes men small. They have walked into the bulge and back out of it under sky that never warms. They have learned to count minutes of life by the weight of ammunition left in the bandoliers and by how fast a hand can seat a clip with numb fingers. They fear the same things they were told to fear: the MG that appears at the wrong time and the wrong angle, the closet door crash of an MP40 at 20 yards, the single clean crack of a car 98K that knows exactly when they must rise. The stakes are plain enough for men without plans in their pockets. If Germany still turns streets into altars to the MG, if woods still gift ambush distance to the SMG, then the war shifts back toward months instead of weeks. Months to redraw maps behind the Rhine, months to teach boys to die just slowly. Enough to be profitable months to bargain in ruins. If the Americans break those last rights, if they prove that a rifle line does not need to yield the first 30 seconds, then 1,000 villages change shape at once. The aura around close-in shock becomes weight to carry, not a threat to fear. The contradiction runs right through the snow. German squads are built around the machine gun and the idea that the rifle and the SMG escort it forward until it speaks. American squads are built around the idea that every man's rifle can speak now before anything else and keep speaking. One side prepares its single instrument, the other makes an orchestra of low brass and woodwind and sets them to tempo. The German story demands closing, the American story demands distance. That is why the moment on the lane matters, not because one gun team died in the cold, but because you could see a fiction erode and turn granular as if a photograph sat too long under a light. If a rifle section can keep you at 250 meters and pluck apart your machine gun before it breathes, then your script calls for an actor who is already off stage. The American squad does not need to be brilliant to do this. It only needs to be awake and disciplined, and armed with a tool that treats distance and time as elastic in the hands. The pressure on the German mind is cruel and subtle. They have lost oil and sky, but they still carry certainty that Americans are clumsy up close, that their rifles will cough and stop between shots, that you can count the timing and walk into it like stepping stones. In late winter, facing men who do not pause for bolts, certainty hitches. The MG team that once drew confidence from its own ritual now feels watched by a line of eyes already sighted. The MP-40 pair that used to eat 80 meters in a good rush now feels every meter get heavy. For the Americans, the pressure is different. They are told to move a war to the Rhine by the calendar. No one gives them extra breath to do it. The rifle is not their glory. It is their metronome. They are learning to think in beats, identify, acquire, fire, reload, fire, shift. They are learning that 200 meters is not neutral space. It is theirs if they claim it. So the cord stretches from that field to 100 others taught enough to sing. If a single rifle line holds its distance and ruins the German opening, the cord resolves the same way in other villages the same day. The contest is no longer merely about who owns the next hedge. It is about whether the last German psychological weapon, the first half-minute, still works. January 1945, outside Foy, Belgium. A white farm lane cuts between a seam of spruce and a low snowbank where breath hangs and time feels brittle. A German light machine gun team rises to speak the sentence they have rehearsed for years. The American line does not bother to move. 7 rifles come up as if pulled by one string. The first N-block clips crack like a zipper, and in the span where a tripod should have bitten dirt and a drum magazine should have found its cadence, nothing comes back. At 200 meters, the myth that speed and shock can always cross open ground simply fails, not because anyone loses their nerve, but because a rifle line that never pauses to work a bolt steals the first half-minute and never gives it back. German squads were built like a mouth with legs. The L, M, G pronounces the opening clause. The bolt-action rifles add punctuation in a sprint to close. That ritual assumes you own the first seconds, that a machine gun can anchor, that a corporal can whip 2 bodies into one momentum before reply builds. The late-war American platoon learned a grammar that refuses to wait. The M1 Garand is not a part of the plan. It is the plan. 8 rounds on an N-block clip fall into a receiver with a practiced smack. The rifle returns to the cheek without a bolt-work penalty. Sight picture comes back as reflex instead of task. A Browning automatic rifle stitches the seam of hedge and wall so that the evenly spaced beats of semi-automatic fire can keep heads down while men step, look, and speak again. It is not louder than a machine gun. It is steadier than a human breath. On the lane by Foy, you can imagine the camera sitting low on the snow watching the crucial detail fail. The tripod never settles. The assistant gunner fumbles cartridges into a drift that behaves like sand. The corporal's timing, good enough in autumn fields, falls behind a tempo that never breaks because the American squad leader's orders are intentionally dull. Gun at left, spruce 1 and 3. Take the gun. 2 watches the dip. 4 BAR, sow the seam. They do not need poetry. They need a line that refuses to inhale just to load. In the Hürtgen forest near Groschau, the same rule hardens because trees shorten lanes and punish any weapon that needs a platform. A machine gun is a sentence that requires a desk. The Garand is a pencil you can write with while walking. Even when Germans try to lead with the gun, the time to build a base vanishes. By the time the muzzle is properly placed, the men behind it are already pinned by iron regular beats. At the edge of Linnich, the geometry changes, but the math does not. Urban walls compress the first 100 meters into the whole fight. You do not need heavy bursts to control a street mouth. You need a wall of evenly spaced aimed shots that make anyone who raises a helmet to check the corner snap back down by reflex. In all 3 places, the American voice sounds procedural target, seam-bound, while the German corporal is a beat late, not because he forgot the drill, but because the opening measure already belongs to someone else. Nothing about this is mystical or a brochure maximum range. The edge is a repeatable behavior, a line of rifles that do not ask permission from a bolt, a squad that does not surrender time to the single long breath a machine gun needs at the start. Training moves distribution of fire to the first page rather than the appendix. Logistics make the tempo safe by ensuring that if one rifle cracks a sight or one man stumbles another shoulder and another clip slide into the same slot without reverence for any sacred object. Reports climb into battalion files with the same sentence written different ways. Rifle fire at range do not present them a straight approach. General George S. Patton's boast survives the winter because men in lanes like these made it true. The M1 Garand, the greatest battle implement ever devised, did not make anyone brave, but it turned time and distance elastic in the hands of platoons, disciplined enough to keep talking while others were forced to gulp air. If you were carrying only a Car 9 8K, at what exact distance would you try to flip this equation? 150, 200, 250. Pick the number and defend it. The German corporal feels the good click of routine in his bones. The snow is wrong, but the rhythm is right, range guessed by stride and habit. The gun out front, the drum held like a child, the tripod swung dead level so it bites clean on the first bite. He hears his own breath pressed small inside the wool and feels the skin pull at the corner of his mouth where the old cut never healed. He lifts his hand in a half fist and drops it. He is still dropping it when the first round punches the man with the drum and the strap yanks the corporal's glove crooked. He steps to catch the falling weight and a second hit twists the other man into him belt and body together and they rattle the tripod legs like loose shutters. The corporal hears a sound he always associates with safety, the thin clink of ammunition dropping onto something solid, and realizes it is the belt spitting itself across ice. He looks for the cover. He sees only white and a lane, and at its far end, the motion of men who refuse to move. His own rifleman to the left fires once, and then fights the bolt, and then disappears behind a stump that will not hold him if he is chosen next. The corporal feels the smallest, most private shame a soldier can feel, not fear, but the weight of having asked time from other men that he cannot pay back. He wants to drag the tripod and cannot convince his knees to lift the proper height to clear the struts. He goes forward 2 steps anyway, because the body knows the drill better than the mind. He makes it half a step more. On the other side, the American squad leader does not taste any of this. He tastes cold iron from the lip of his canteen still on his teeth and the cider aftertaste of a cigarette that did not burn right. He had the line sighted 10 minutes ago when the first ash fell, and he told his left-hand rifle to take the lane and his right-hand rifle to hold the corner. He hears the MG team before he sees them. He has seen too many set. He knows their sound like a cousin's laugh. "Gun up left spruce," he says, not loud. 1 and 3 take the gun. 2 watch the dip. 4 BAR feed the seam. There is no joy in his voice, and no heat. He breathes the cheek. Weld never changes. The front sight post sits where it sat before, and he thinks without drama of the small surprise the German men will feel when their gun fails to become the center of the scene. He fires. The rifle comes home again. He fires again. He hears someone to his left call up as the clip kicks free, and a new one goes in. He does not look. The first 2 men are already ragdolls. He does not wince. He does not cheer. He looks for the tripod because that is what will hurt him next if it is placed. It is not placed. He shifts. Dip. 2 in the dip. The bar makes a sound like ripping cloth for 2 seconds and then not. Men in the dip try to be smaller than they are. He sees an elbow and a muzzle and pages through them with a steadiness that will later make him feel tired, not guilty. He does not feel better or worse when bodies stop moving. He feels ready to move the line 1 building down, because that is what the book says if the lane is yours. He pulls the squad back 1 bound because the book also says the Germans may bring a Faust down the side or a mortar over the top, and he has no interest in learning the lesson twice. They flow like men rehearsing, not heroes improvising. They vanish from the old positions before a sharp German with a glass can walk the line and tell a tube where to cough. On the German side, nothing is where it should be now. The corporal looks to his right for his machine. It is 2 men and a spill of brass. He looks to his left for the NCO, who should be shouting. He sees a hat and the crown of a head that refuses to lift. The men with MP-40s who have trained themselves to run into the space after the gun speaks are left with nothing to follow but air and grief. A private looks back toward the trees for permission to become smaller than the doctrine allows, and finds none, so he invents his own permission and crawls. He will not be charged for this invention later, because there will be no one left to care. The American line recites its catechism in a different tone. Target burning. Shift left. Watch the flank. Hold on the stone. 1 bounds, 2 covers. Reload on the move. Do not silhouette on the ridge. Take the next corner low. It is not courage. It is refusal to make new poetry when the old song keeps men alive. Snow eats sound until rifles speak. On a morning outside Foy, the first thing you hear is not a belt spooling up, but the metallic chirp of clips, and then a peculiar quiet, where a German light machine gun was supposed to punch a hole in the air. Across the winter, from the Hurtgen trees near Groschau to the brick faces on the edge of Linnich squads that had counted on the fear of closing, found themselves pinned by a quieter truth. The ritual fails if the rifles never pause. The German squad at its best is a precise instrument, a mouth of steel, whose sentence begins at the gun with bolt-action rifles as marks of cadence that herd the enemy into angles. The American platoon that matured in late 1944 is an orchestra that begins with every instrument at once, in which the default solution to a lane at 200 meters is not to produce a single loud voice, but to produce 100 steady heartbeats. The stakes of this difference are not academic. Whoever owns the first 30 seconds around 200 meters, owns ground and ground in winter, decides whether you get to try a second plan or die executing the first. The reason sits in the hands. The Garand's 8-round en-block clip drops and locks with a flat smack, and the rifle returns to a cheek-weld as the sight picture snaps back like a rubber band. There is no bolt-work tax to pay, no need to offload aim to a second motion. A Browning automatic rifle combs the edge of hedge and masonry so that semi-automatic rifles firing as if to a metronome can control when heads leave the snow. None of this erases German virtues. An MG-34 or MG-42 that finds a stable leg and a sane field can own a lane. A Car 98K cracked by good hands can reach clean and far. But winter lanes and compressed approaches punish the need to build, and the American rhythm punishes the moment a man must choose between cycling a bolt and keeping his face behind his sights. At Foy, the gun never sings because the desk is never built. The tripod skids on a buried crust, the drum tips. One man looks sideways for permission he cannot afford to ask for. In the woods near Groschau, the machine gun needs a base, but the trees deny time, and by the time the base exists, the rifles have already declared the lane closed. On the edge of Linnich, the first 100 meters become the war. The American fire is not theatrical. It is even to the point of boredom, and boredom is exactly what keeps the other side from lifting its eyes. In each incident, the American squad leader sounds like a manual, and the German corporal's timing is a single fatal beat behind. What looks like a property of steel is really a property of paper and fuel. Training that teaches distribution of fire before any talk of heroics. Radios used to move rifles rather than to rescue them. Logistics that make replacement casual. Another rifle, another clip, another shoulder, so that forward failure does not travel backward as panic. Battalion notes echo one another. Do not give them a straight approach under sustained rifle tempo. The tempo is not a speech. It is a policy executed by hands. The Garand is not a machine gun and does not need to be one. Its gift is tempo, the permission structure for a squad to keep talking while another side is forced to inhale. Patton's famous pride works because platoons made it work. Lanes in snow turned the sentence into lived truth. The fair red leaves room for counterplay, mortars, angles, smoke, darkness, but also admits that on days like these, the old German ritual could not form because the opening breath was stolen. If you were tasked to rewrite the German winter counter-drill, which 2 changes would you make first? Set a range floor, deepen angles, lean on tubes. Be specific. The winter, when shock felt like legend, ended on lanes like these. Afterward, German companies leaned harder into night and weather, and American platoons treated the rifle not as a crutch for a plan, but as the plan itself. What remains on film is not glory, but the memory that seconds once owned move armies. The myth had been short and simple: get close, and the American rifle will run out of breath. The first half-minute belongs to the gun that sets up and to the men who sprint. It was true often enough in earlier years to become a truth. In the winter lanes it fails. The tactical layer collapses first. Squads that expect panic at 100 meters watch men hold their feet and keep their cheeks on wood. The MG does not become the center. It becomes a target with two heads. The first sprint eats bullets at 200 meters that used to be saved for 70. The German NCO hears himself shout the same words he has always shouted, and listens to them, land on men who are flatter than he remembers because they have seen the first two die in the opening 3 seconds. The ritual no longer promises safety. The cooler layer comes later in paper. Reports stack in battalion offices and company notebooks. They are not poetic. They say that American rifle fire at medium range is heavier and more accurate than expected, that attempts to close with SMGs without preparatory artillery or surprise are waste, that machine guns must be emplaced from deception and depth, rather than introduced by parade. A line crops up more than once in the quiet notes of officers who have no reason to flatter the enemy. The Americans now mass-accurate rifle fire at range. Do not present them with a straight approach. A single sentence from a German lieutenant speaks for many. We could not start the fight where we wished. They started it earlier. It is as clinical as a coroner. Behavior changes. German squads begin to ask more of mortars and less of legs. They lean harder on dark and weather and angles. They do not try to take the first half-minute. They try to erase it with tricks, so the fight starts where it used to. American squads notice. They prepare for tricks and keep their rifles ready anyway. The contest becomes about forcing the start line backward and forward like a piece on a board. That was the last winter the close-in rush felt like a legend. After that it was a gamble, and Germany could no longer afford gambles that relied on men surviving the first 50 yards. January 1945, Foy, Belgium, a white lane, a seam of spruce, the stillness before speech. A gun team rises to lay down the opening sentence, but a line of rifles answers in the same instant and leaves no air to breathe. N-block clips ping like metronomes. The machine gun never finds its first word. Later, a lieutenant will write that they could not raise their heads at 200, and that single distance will haunt the rest of the winter. German doctrine puts grammar in the machine gun, and cadence in the bolt guns. American practice by late war begins with everyone speaking at once, a rifle orchestra with the bar as needle along the seam. To outrange here is not to boast of paper distances, but to own the first 30 seconds around 200 meters, so completely that approach dies at the start line. The side that breathes second loses both tempo and ground. The Garand cycle explains the behavior 8-round clip no bolt work pause sight picture that returns by reflex. Each man's hands show the same economy, load, lock, cheek, press, return, while the BAR combs the boundary that would otherwise spit attackers into visibility. Against that, the Car 9-8K's excellence carries a visible pause, and the pause is precisely where lanes kill. At Foy, the desk for a machine gun is never built. Snow turns a tripod into a skate and a drum into clutter. In the trees near Grossau, short lanes and bad angles deny the time a platform requires, so rifles own the clock. At Linnich, Brick and Alley compress the first 100 meters into the whole decision, and an even almost bored American fire controls when heads lift. The American leader speaks in procedures. The German corporal arrives 1 beat late. Training moves. Distribution of fire to the front of the book. Radios push rifles rather than beg for rescue. Logistics make it safe to fight like an assembly line if a piece cracks another, slides into place without ceremony. Germany remains lethal, but is forced to act like a curator, protecting fragile pieces where any loss threatens the ritual itself. Plot tempo against distance and watch the opening 3 seconds decide outcomes. Mortars and darkness appear as substitutes for stolen time, but the rifle line, stubborn rather than glamorous, keeps moving the start line forward and back until the neutral ground becomes American space. The old belief that close-in shock can always be manufactured dissolves because the first breath never happens. Battalion files whisper the same guidance avoids straight approaches under rifle tempo at range. Platoons begin every plan assuming that 200 meters belong to them if they seize it first. Patton's sentence turns from pride into description, the greatest battle implement ever devised, and the next generation's answer, the assault rifle, is best read as an attempt to erase the pause that winter rifle lines exploited. If you could change just one variable weapon, weather, or the width of the lane which would most likely restore the old opening ritual, and why,